Lucas Melgaco, Brazilian, but you work in Belgium,
Yep,
right?
that's it.
So, but you are going to talk also, I think your perspective is combining a little bit of global north and global south.
That's
Isn't
correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you,
So,
Vanya.
welcome.
And thank you for the invitation. It's really great to be here. I've becoming a bit skeptical with scientific conferences, to be very honest. I have recently tweeted that we should start boycotting the big conferences, although I'm going to be in one next week in the ESC. But it's really great. This is more compact, but really efficient, and in the fact that being able to talk to the practitioners is really, really great. We have this tendency to stay in academia and create some stereotypes about the practitioners, and some then we have some comments from you practitioners that like, well, they think a bit differently than what we would expect. So it's really, really great to be here. I'm based in Belgium for 6 years now, and I've been doing research on protests. You see my presentation is a little bit, I've been presenting this to activists so far, not so much to practitioners and to criminologists, a bit less. And you see that I'm still thinking like, what's the message I want to pass to activists? But I'll try to slightly change a bit my approach. This is a very simplistic, schematic way to see surveillance that I'm suggesting, is that we could talk about 3 tenses of surveillance. If you think about CCTV can be used for what has already passed, so for investigation. CCTV can be used for the future, for deterrence, to try to convince someone not to commit a crime. But CCTV can also be used in real time. And in most cases, surveillance technologies, this is the most complex, and they are in most cases not very effective in real-time intervention. But there is definitely something really new about this that I'm going to call here simultaneity. This capacity of sharing, of co-presence, of sharing the same event, real-time, separated by few kilometers or many kilometers. I could bring so many examples. I just chose one, but I'm sure you get the idea. I'm assuming you all recognize this picture, most probably. This is a very good example, in my opinion, of real-time surveillance. There was a camera with an officer in the action to get Osama bin Laden, and they were sharing the same moment in real time, but from distance. I'm a huge fan of this Brazilian geographer and philosopher that I'm assuming most of you have never heard about, but I've been trying to translate him into English and to introduce a bit of theory from the global south into the English academy, but it's not so easy. But he has one concept that I find particularly interesting, is this idea of convergence of moments. So you have moments that are shared in real time, and this has a lot of implications, and that's what I want to talk about. But before going into the present now, I would like to start with a question. In your opinion, which was the most groundbreaking form of information and communication technology in regard to simultaneity or real-time communication? If I asked you, I'm assuming you would probably say cell phone, body cams, drones, the internet. Let's go back. Television, live television, radio. And if we really, really go back, we would get to the telegraph. That's really revolutionary, because it's the very first time in history that communication can be transmitted without the necessity of a material sender. You just send the information. It's really revolutionary. Geography, space, networks, they all own to the telegraph this new capacity of action from distance. But I'm going to go back to the present and focus on simultaneity today. So I believe that there is big change here from the advent of the internet or Web 1.0 to the internet today. And what I'm looking at is how, especially from the Arab Spring till today, Web 2.0 has changed the way the interaction in public space. Now, I'm assuming that most of you have your phone with you. So you don't go back home to connect to the internet. The internet is with you. You are connected. You are potentially connected. But what I'm going to show you is that more than that, we are potentially streamers. Potentially, we can be alternative journalists and stream in real time. In the audience, has anyone here ever used your phone to live stream an event? 1, 2. That's interesting. It's more than I expected. And I have 5 people. Have you ever watched on YouTube or Facebook Live something being streamed live? Then I think most of you, right? There is definitely something new coming on, and that's what I want to look at. But first, I'm going to bring anecdotes from both Belgium and Brazil. Methodologically, I have to admit that my research has a very loose methodology. When I see the works that Vanya, for example, produced, I'm really impressed and very jealous because my methodology is always very loose, but it's a mixture of participatory observation, interview with the streamers. I have talked to many of them. I have done with them, together with them. I have tried myself, but so far not very successful. And in one of the anecdotes that I came across, I was talking to one of these alternative journalists from a collective called Zin TV in Brussels. And he told me this anecdote that in October 2015 in Brussels, Thomas Michel, cameraman for the alternative media collective Zin TV, was stopped by the police when filming a protest against the TTIP. The police, in an illegal action, I must say that because according to the Belgian legislation, you are allowed to record police. They forced Michel to delete all pictures and videos he had taken with his camera. If you go back to 2013 in Brazil, we have a very similar case. I must confess I didn't test if the video worked, but we have very similar case, but with a different result. So you may have heard that in 2013, we can call this maybe the Brazilian Spring or June Journeys. We have mass protests in Brazil. A lot of conflicts between activists and the police. Many cases of violence. And one group was really active. And this is the very first time in the Brazilian history that you have one organized alternative group to broadcast the protests in real time. It's called Media Ninja, from independent journalism and action storytellings. And let's see. Yeah. Okay, that's no problem. No, but, o vídeo estava aqui. Ali está. It's fine. I think it can be more.
Let's try.
Go check if this one works. That's no problem. It'll be more, can be more interesting if I tell you what is in the video. So you have to use a bit of your imagination, but I think it can be a good exercise. This video was taken by one of these alternative journalists in Brazil in 2013. At the moment that the police, a police officer, was stopping him because he was filming the work of the police. And the video is about the conversation of the dialogue between the activists and the police. And the activists tell the police, "You cannot take out my camera. This is against the law." And the officer tries to get the camera, and then he says, "Look, you're live, and there is right now 5,000 people watching this video." And the police officer stopped. So it's a similar situation that we saw in Belgium, but with a different output. And the difference here is the fact that this video is being not only broadcast live, but to a relatively big network. So so there is definitely something new to surveillance today that we can call surveillance if you want to focus on the idea that there is a top-down surveillance monitoring being done, but also something that is more bottom-up. I think this is interesting as a first approach. It's not enough to explain the complexity of live streaming. So other concepts can maybe be more interesting, for example, synopticon. Because the fact here, what makes this tool so powerful is not just the fact that you are recording. It's the fact that you are recording and in real time broadcasting to a very big network. I'll show you an example from a protest that I'm following in Paris and Brussels called Nuit debout, which loosely translated is be something like standing up overnight. It was bigger in Paris, but also pretty intense in Brussels. And this streamer became relatively famous. He's one of the main streamers for Nuit debout in Paris. And in one event, he was broadcasting to 80,000 people. 80,000 people were watching the videos that he was broadcasting. This is extremely powerful in terms of the consequences of that. I've talked to other streamers that were very critical to the work of Remy. One of the criticisms from the activists, they are not all very happy with that. I'll show you why. One of the reasons is because Remy, he is always narrating, he's always telling a story of what he's seeing, which somehow he's telling his side of the story of something that is seen as, okay, this is real time, this is the reality. But is the reality narrated from the eyes of Remy? That's what I wanted to show you with this video. This one is really a pity, but again, I will ask you to be creative and trust me. In my loose methodology, another thing that I'm doing is that when there is a protest, especially when I cannot be in the protest, from my home or from my office at the university, I go online and I start looking for live streaming, and I start recording this live stream. That's what I've done here. It was a protest organized by the union in Brussels was not Nuit Debout. But what I find very interesting in this video, this is used as it's through Periscope. It's one of the many softwares that you can install. If you haven't given it a try, I would suggest it to try it. It's pretty easy to use. It used to be a more alternative software, Periscope. It was recently bought by Twitter, so it became like mainstream. But with the advantage that it became really user-friendly, which means any of you can, in few seconds, install Periscope on your cell phone and start doing what this person was doing that day. So it's just a everyday situation. There is no violence going on there. There is no conflict. But he's telling the story. He's telling, I'm sorry, my battery is about to die, so I will be able to record a few minutes. And then the users, the spectators, they are telling him, but didn't you bring the second, an spare battery? He said, no, I forgot. So there is interaction. And then someone asked, what was this noise that I just heard? And then he said, it's just some protesters that are using fireworks. There is nothing. And then someone asked you, can you please turn to your right? I want to see what is going on. So it's a lot of interactions between a big list of, in this case, there were 949 people interacting, people liking and interacting with this user. But there is something more dialectic behind live stream. I have given presentations where I was overly optimistic about the technology because it's really cool. Let's say it's really impressive when you see like we can broadcast anything. I should have done that. I have done this before and just broadcast my talk. So I'm talking to you, and we could see together on my Twitter account this being broadcast live, which is interesting to already talk about privacy issues because I could be talking, just filming myself, but I could put my phone here, be seeing your reactions in real time and broadcast that to all my not so many followers on Twitter, which would already raise some questions about consent, about privacy, and so on. That's what some group collectives are trying to raise, this thing that it's becoming more banal. Anyone can broadcast. When this started just 5 years ago, it was a job for experts. You need to know a little bit about computer science to be able to do it. That also means that not anyone could do it, and the people who were doing that, they were somehow trained to do it. Also trained in terms of how to do it in a way that doesn't harm the intentions of that protest. For example, one of the few ethics of live streaming, you should try to, as little as possible, identify people that you are broadcasting. You should do it from distance. You should try to focus on people's legs and back, but avoid showing faces. You should try as little as possible to interpret. That's also an interesting thing. You should not to over-interpret what we're seeing. The idea of live streaming would be more, according to the activists, to show it and let people interpret their way. And this is one of the many collectives who are actively skeptical and I would say even against, by the fact that live streamers make great informants. So far, with my interaction with Belgian police, I have asked many times if they have ever went online to follow live broadcasts of protests, and they have never done that. But I wouldn't be surprised if this starts to be done, because it's really easy. You just go for a hashtag, basically. And with a hashtag, you can find all the videos. If you are on Twitter, for example, you find the right hashtag for that protest, and you immediately find all the videos live of that event. Is becoming more and more popular. So what We Crop Watch says, they give some suggestions for the streamers. Stand hundreds of feet away from the group so the low quality recording doesn't pick up conversations or people's identity. Interesting discussion, because we just said earlier today, you are in public space, so your expectations of privacy are not the same as in a private space. Correct. I absolutely agree. But I'll tell you a very short, funny anecdote that happened to me 2 weeks ago in Brussels. I live in the outskirts of Brussels, and I was in a park with my daughter, and a group of scouts, Boy Scouts, approached me. It was a competition, and they asked if I could perform a dance with them, because their group would earn some points. I would normally say no. I'm not really, I'm a bit shy for this, but I was with my daughter, and I was like, okay, I was a bit, I'll do it for her. And I performed the dance, and they got their points. I was in public space. But knowing, instinctively, I checked around if there was anyone who I knew. I knew I was in public space, my expectations of privacy were low. But if I knew that I was being recorded, live, broadcasted to a group of someone with 5,000 followers, I would definitely not do it. Or at least I would try to be a bit better than, although I'm Brazilian, I'm a terrible dancer. And that's just one example of, this thing about public space and expectations of privacy is not a black and white discussion. Don't film people's identity without their consent. It's very complicated. How do you deal with consent in public space, in a protest, in a moment of tension, in a moment of conflict? It's technically impossible to ask for consent. And if you do it, probably the results will be completely different. Don't narrate intentions, tactics, locations, or destinations. Where you see that this is really dedicated to activists. Wear a bright shirt that says live streamer or informant. That's obviously is a joke, but that's also why I asked if body cams, if people know they're being filmed, you can bring the same discussion for people in the street. Should you always tell that you are live streaming something or not? Okay, I think this is. I have brought this slide to activists, to streamers, and asked them, so do you agree with that? How do you react to that? One of the response I got from one relatively famous streamer, she told me that I disagree with that, because most of the times it's the collective, it's the organization of the protest who calls me to come and live stream. Because there is a potential amplification of the protest, of the demonstration. Nuit Debout is a very good example where this really happen. Once they start live streaming the protests that were counting, this in Brussels that I could follow, 50, 100 people, 1,000, 2,000, once that went live. So it had an effect of amplifying social movement. There is another effect that is being called slacktivism too. I've done that myself as a researcher. There was one of the moments I could have gone to the protest, and I tried to go to as many as I can in Brussels. This time I was a bit tired, and I said, okay, I will stay home, and I will follow it through live streaming. So, and I was there liking, disliking, commenting. But this is what's been called slacktivism. It's also a potential output of these new technologies. So my concluding slide, originally I made a slide saying what is positive and what's negative about live streaming. And I said, it's a bit more complex than that. So I deleted it, and I made a new one where I tried to compile a bit what are the implications of live streaming. Live streaming is related to censorship in many different ways. Live streaming, it's an alternative to mainstream media. You can see the same event from the eyes of an alternative journalist who has no commitment with sponsors, for example. That's really new. That's really something that in the events in Brazil, that was really clear. If you see the discourse of mainstream media, the discourse of Media Ninja was completely different. How they portrayed the work of the police, for example, it was clear. There is a lot of literature already published there. Live streaming has this idea that I told you about storytellers. It relates to police brutality in ways that I showed you. I have heard different testimonials here. I have heard streamers saying that, as in the video, that avoid police brutality. But I have heard from them many cases where the fact of being recording and streaming created the conflict. It was that what made the officers very uncomfortable by the fact, also because it's a technology that they don't know very well, and they don't know the consequences of this technology. So live streaming created more police brutality. Examples of undercover police. The very first time at Nuit Debout, I arrived. I haven't talked to any of the activists at that point, and I start broadcasting without permission. But you wouldn't expect to have permission. It's in a public space, and also my intentions was, I was somehow on their side. I wanted to amplify a bit what they were doing, and I start broadcasting live. And I was approached by one of the official streamers from the group, which I have the most interesting dialogue, and then that became an interview for the research. But he initially approached me to say, what are you doing? Who are you? What are your connection with the... So by that I want to say that context really matters. It still matters, even with these new technologies. It matters a lot. I thought about ethics. I thought about how it amplifies, how it's an alternative to mainstream media, how it can create... it's a rich data for the police in many different ways. You can not only try to find information online in real time, but you can also send an undercover officer to record the protest. This was used, but I have no time to go into that. But in Brazil, in 2013, that happened with the police, with undercover police officers disguised as activists to real time streaming of these events. Well, when Vanya mentioned that I should get some questions for you, I was a bit excited with this possibility. I'll make a selection. To conclude, I'll conclude before moving to the questions with this idea of three tenses and how live stream is related to these three tenses, as I've said. It's clear that it's related to the present, to real time. There are new possibilities there. it's also related to investigation because many of these applications, and you have many, really many, Periscope, Bambuser, Justin TV, Ustream, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, there are many, and they are becoming more mainstream, I would say. Some of them, like Periscope, there is no way to record what you broadcast. So if you didn't see that live, that after a few hours, that's gonna be deleted. Other apps like Bambuser, which is one that the activists normally use more than Periscope, because they have this thing. I want to avoid Twitter, but on the other hand, they also use Periscope because through Twitter, your audience is much larger. So there is an issue there. But Bambuser, for example, records everything. So everything that is broadcast live also became data. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm looking to all the records that I can find online for Nuit Debout in Brussels. So watching it's very boring most of the time. There nothing happened. No, I don't think that most of the time is just another march, another protest that nothing really exciting happens. But it's a very rich material. It can be a very rich material for the police, for example. And one of my questions here is about the future. And I'll start by that. Where is it? Is here. Will police officers act differently when knowing they can be filmed and streamed live? That's one question that especially the practitioners, if you think this will be effective in terms of changing the relationship, officers and citizens. I'll go quickly through the questions. The first one is, should it be regulated? It is somehow regulated, but should it be more regulated? By that, I want to say, should all the streamers be obliged to bring the tag saying, I'm a streamer, you are being broadcast live? Is a question of privacy there. Should any citizen be allowed to live stream, or should it be exclusive to traditional journalists? This is normally the reaction from the police. I have been in that has happened to me already more than once, that I was broadcasting live the police, and they came to me and asked, where are your credentials? Because I say, I'm press. And then I say, okay, I'm scientist. But the reaction is like, okay, but are you a credentialed journalist? And I said, no, but I know my rights. I know that by Belgian, according to the Belgian law, I can do this. I can record you live, although you're an officer. For some activists, this should not be allowed to everyone. This should be just for the trained streamers, because they know how to do it in a way that doesn't harm the interests of the protest. This is a discussion that I think is really relevant. Should citizens always be allowed to live stream police officer on duty? This changes from country to country, but in the US, in Brazil, and in Belgium, you can do it. That is what in the law, but as I showed you, that's not necessarily respected, but that's what is in the law. I will skip this one, it's a bit silly question. Should you have like specific kinds of events that should be broadcasted and other that you should avoid? For example, in a moment of, for example, in a protest with black blocs. You know this idea of black blocs? People all covered in black. They conceal their faces, so the black blocs is more anarchical tactics. They are very resistant to live streaming, starting by the point that they not want to be recognized in public space. That's why they try to cover their face and their bodies. Should we stream that or not? And then I'll end with a question. I was happy to see that Vanya mentioned the circle. Although I call myself a surveillance scholar, I was very resistant to read the circle because there was so much hype about it. And I just finished reading it now, and I said, okay, there is a really good reason why it's so popular. It's a really intriguing book. There is one scene in the book, I hope this is not a spoiler, it's more in the beginning than towards the end, that at the circle, a person comes and show a project, is Santos, her name, and it's a politician who is recording everything. She records her whole life. And then the discussion is like, what are the limits of this? It's a very dystopic idea. The idea is transparency, especially because it's a politician. But while reading, you already get very uncomfortable with this idea, but should we really broadcast everything? That's a very dystopic future. On the other hand, there is a very utopic idea that you can use broadcasting for justice, to protect protesters and so on. So I'd like to hear, well, so many you can pick questions that you are more interested to debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas.
So it's just a clarifying question. You've obviously been to more protest marches than I have. Is it your impression that people feel safer because they're being recorded?
It's a good question because I don't have one simple answer to that. Normally, yes, especially in cases of abuse of the police. But you know that depending on that depends a lot on the kind of protest you are. You know that in Brussels you have really all kinds of protests. You have a lot of protests for against Monsanto, for example. These are normally very peaceful protests. But when you have protests, anti-austerity protests, there's always violence there. There's always groups who will go into direct conflict with the police. And they would not like that you're recording them, and they feel that your recording will harm them, you help the police to identify. But in general, I would say that yes, it creates an idea of we are more protected against police brutality. I would have to really interview them and ask how they feel. That's more my impression when I'm this protest.
I always think about the question, will police officers act differently? It very much depends on the climate in the police in that country or in that city, or how the police officer acts normally. I would say for me and my colleagues here, we're so used that we expect to be filmed. And we're so used to it, and we don't care. That it doesn't concern us at all that we're being filmed. I don't act any differently because it's a normality.
Do you when you think I'm being filmed, do you also the officers relate to this idea? I'm not only filmed, I'm live.
Not really.
That's a bit different.
Not really.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
And that's the future.
Yes.
Probably.
Yes. And should citizens be allowed to live stream police officers always? I think in general, yes, but there are situations when we can tell someone to leave because they interfere with our work legally. If we interview a person and it's sensitive for that person, maybe, or if we are doing something else. But many times we try to take it to another place instead, rather than telling people to leave. So for us here in Sweden, it's my opinion, it's not a big problem for us as police officers, really.
You gave a very good example because for this specific case that I told you from Zing TV, I managed to talk to both sides. And the argument of the officer was, Yeah, but he was not. He was a kind of. Do you use this word? Agitator. He was provoking me, and I had to do that to. So the stop and search. It was legal by the fact that he was saying it's not because he was recording and broadcasting, but he was bothering my. He was disturbing. And could be the case. What is problematic in this particular case is the follow-up, the fact that they asked for the SD card, they deleted, and that's really illegal according to Belgian legislation. Later on, he managed to get his SD card back, which the police had to do that. They don't have the right to keep his belongings. Everything has been erased. Then he did something that I find particularly interesting. Together with a hacker friend of him, they managed to recover some of the images. So, and that became an art exposition. I found this story particularly interesting.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm doing research on surveillance myself, so it was really very intriguing, your presentation. Actually, I have a comment to one of the questions because I've seen studies on that police officers act differently when knowing they can be filmed, but I don't remember the name.
Yeah,
I think there are just one. There are very few of them, but there are studies on that.
I've recently reviewed one paper on that, and I should have been saying that, but
because I've seen it.
It has been published already.
Yeah,
it's very good. It's a very. I
because I read
I
read a paper that was the Thin Blue Line or something.
Yeah, this one is called the Prolepticon. There's every time new names for surveillance. But it's specifically about that. It's in the U.S., in Canada. And the author came to the conclusion that yes, it did change, but it's very difficult to generalize in this.
I think we have to have more research on that. Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
And I was just going to comment because I thought it was so interesting what you talked about narrating. The live streaming, that it isn't, you are not supposed to do that. It's not good ethics, because I've written a paper on. I put it outside on a mobile phone clip that the people who saw the clip thought that they saw something they saw something else than actually was filmed, because there was the film clip was uploaded on YouTube with comments that how you should watch the clip. So there's something similar with that. I think that sometimes the clips, the film clips, or the live streaming you shouldn't, or the audience should have their own thoughts about it, their own opinion. That's very interesting.
It's a very good point. But I'm here more just copying and repeating what they say, because I also think it's a bit of naive to think that just by recording, okay, that's the reality. In one of the events that I was broadcasting, Nuit Debout is not any protest. It's a kind of protest where you have the center, and there you have a band playing, you have people, a microphone. It's all around the microphone. When I was broadcasting the person in the microphone, it was okay. When I turned my camera to the public, I could see a bit of unease with that. So there is a lot of choice on what I'm recording. No, it's not the reality. It's one gaze, one point of view. So narrating or not, I'm choosing and making selections of, and all the streamers that I talk to, I always ask this question, so what calls your attention to? And they say, conflicts, violence, everything that is out of norm. And then I ask, but why you do that? I get questions like, I want to protect them, but I have also reactions saying, this makes my video viral, and I get more followers on Facebook, on Twitter, and so on. So there is also a bit of social media celebrity behind these streamers that should be taken into account.
Okay, you almost answered my question because I was really thinking about the motives behind the live streaming from some of the people that live stream on the protests, because everybody's going for the social acceptance and likes and dislikes. Like if your video doesn't go viral, then you have an issue. You have to find more topics. And I wanted to ask, because this has been an issue. I come from Greece. We have like 1.5 protests per day, which is like 500 something in Athens at least. So it's quite huge. Everybody's protesting about. And live streamers and streamers from protests seem to be provoking police in order to do something, so they will become viral. And that was like connected to what you're talking about.
Yeah, I've seen that more than once. This idea, not in live broadcasting, but just recording. I've seen this, and I've talked to the police, and they say that's absolutely true. What you've seen is that to tease the police, and then start recording once the police reacts. That happens almost in any big protests. So there is a bit of performance there behind, definitely.
Thank you very much.